this House would ban sports betting. Representing the proposition, we have the team from Vietnam, and on the opposition, we have the team from India. From the proposition side, our speakers are first speaker, Min An, second speaker, Ha Phuong, third speaker, Te Vie, and reply speaker, Ha Phuong. On the opposition side, our speakers are first speaker, Hasini, second speaker, Avni, third speaker, Hitisha, and reply speaker, Hasini. Each speaker will have 8 minutes to deliver their speech. The first and last minute of each speech is considered protected time, during which points of information, POIs, may not be offered. The judges will signal the end of protected time at the 1 minute mark, after which POIs can be offered and will signal the return to protected time at the 7 minute mark. At the 8 minute mark, they will give a double clap or ding to signal the end of the speech. Additionally, there will be 3 claps or dings at 8:15 and the judges will stop listening at 8:30. Best of luck to both teams, and now hand over the floor to our chair judge.
Welcome everyone to round 3 of WSDC 24. That's India on your chair for this round. I'll invite the panel to introduce themselves. We'll go from left to right.
Hi, I'm today and the teams. Hi everyone, I'm
Excellent. So, the motion for this round reads, sports betting is a form of gambling where people bet money on the outcome of sports events, example, horse races, boxing matches, FIFA World Cup. This includes, but is not limited to, wagering on who will win or will lose the match, margin of victory, the statistical performance of a single player or team, etc. This house will ban sports betting. Without further ado, I invite the first proposition speaker to speak to that motion.
In Euro and World Cup season, we see motorbikes or even cars being parked in front of pawn shops. And this is not because these places become a new parking lot, but because these are valuable properties of sport bettors being kept there so they can earn some money to bet on their favorite players or their favorite team. Government cannot close their eyes when individuals make uninformed, terrible financial decisions that affect themselves and even their family. So proud to propose. So what is the policy on our side? We would ban all forms of sport betting, shut down sport betting companies. In the status quo, we think sport betting is a massive industry that has zero or very little regulation because the sport industry itself is glorified by media, plus the normalization of this culture. I will explain this later. We'll prove why the government needs to take a stand and take action to protect individuals. The true comparative on their side of this debate is that no individuals is harmed if they don't sport bet. They have to tell us the tangible harm of individuals not being able to bet on their favorite players. On to my first argument on why this is a form of self-harming. First, how does sport betting look like? We think before a match, you can go onto websites, you can bet on like their local bar, you can bet on local places that you watch sport with, because note that sport itself is a competitive and it's like a game sport, so you never watch it alone in your house on your couch. We think you watch in like bars, you watch in areas that have a lot of people. Note that the method in which you can sport bet is extremely easy. You can just go to websites, they don't even bother to check your identification. You can just give money to the bartender at the bar to bet on your favorite team. This takes really casual form therefore government cannot take action because people undermine the harms that they have. But also But also note that this form of casual is very different, because in order for you to go to a casino or like go to Las Vegas, for example, this takes more resources, and I'll explain later on why sport betting is uniquely bad. But two, why do people bet then? We think it is the culture of sport itself. Because when you watch sport, your mentality and the mental state of yourself has already been, you've been like thrilled, and you're just so passionate, you're just so enthusiastic for this player. At first, you might bet for fun, but because this culture is so normalized that you will eventually join. Because note that you never watch sports alone. So eventually, your friends or the people you meet at the bar will eventually say, oh, like, why don't you bet on this player? Just $20, for example. Because you're so caught up in the fun, you thought, oh, why shouldn't I bet? It's just $20, right? But also you think that this is a good opportunity for you to gain some money, because you yourself consider yourself to be a huge fan, because you consider that, oh, I know a lot about this player, I've been their fans for like 10 years, so you think that this is a very low risk and high return way to get money. Thirdly, a third thing under this argument is, why are these usually uninformed decisions? Because first of all, sports betting companies are extremely big. They're profit maximizing, and note that they're profit maximizing, and note that they sponsor and they have investment to certain football clubs. So therefore, they have the incentive to hide or not display all information. And note that they usually have like assessment about a team, like, oh, there's a 70% chance that this certain football team will win. Or we think that because they have a streak of a very good performance, they're gonna win this match. But note that when you lose, they're the one who gets the money. This is their incentive to hide information and to lure you into this trap of gambling. So therefore, we think companies control how you think. It's never your independent decisions of, I like this team sport, but it's their scheme in controlling what team sport that you bet for. But secondly, it's just the nature of sport, because sports is a human-based performance field. We think with stocks, it's much more stable, because you have like a lot of index, you have a lot of government regulation, you have a lot of information and data, so you have better information because it's less arbitrary. But thirdly, note that little regulation is also very harmful, because when you watch sport, you focus on the fun, therefore government don't really regulate it, but it's also very hard to regulate it. But note that we think that there's no official body that control the financial transactions surrounding sport betting. With stock market, you have the SEC. With Las Vegas casinos, you have like rules, you have like regulations of government. But in sport bet, it is impossible to impose these things. But why is regulation an important impact of this debate? Because again, with regulation, this is a government action in asserting the stance, and also note that these are protective measures. This is the government making sure that companies don't screw people over, don't trick people into making uninformed decisions. This is a prerequisite to protection. Government cannot let companies scot-free when they trick you into this. But lastly, we think the externalities is also very important, because when your adrenaline is really high, when your dopamine is high, when you sport bet, it makes your decision less informed. But it's just it's like doing drugs, because when you are high and you're addicted to this adrenaline, when you're addicted to this happiness so much, we think that you make less informed decisions. But secondly, it is also a group influence, it's also the peer pressure that you have because of the normalization of this culture. Fourth part of this argument is why this is not just some fun and like $20 bet, but this is likely to scale up, because we think this leads to a cycle of betting. This is the adrenaline rush that you enjoy so much that you conceptualize that betting is part of watching sports itself. It is not the process of watching the game, but it's more like you thinking that, oh, I need to bet for this team in order for the sport to be fun. Even if you don't consciously think so, we think there's an unconscious bias, just an unconscious habit of you doing so every time you watch a sport. But also note that because the sport industry is so prominent, the channels of addiction is also massive. You can take loans very easily from pawn shop, from high interest rate organizations or whatever. Because note that these are regulations, like these or the places where you take loans from are extremely shady, because you cannot go to a bank and take loans from it, because no bank would give you loans for sport betting. But before I go on, sure.
Would you ban all forms of speculation or opinion polls on your side of the house?
What, can you say that again?
Would you ban all forms of speculation or opinion polls on your side?
No, the difference is that that's not your opinion, but it's just company scheme. But we We also think that this is just a much more riskier field. I'll continue and this will engage with their POI. But note that this is a snowball effect because at first you start with $20 and then it accumulates over time. Therefore, people make uninformed decisions because of the externalities, but it's also their want to redeem. After you lose, you don't think, oh, I'm going to stop there, but you just want to continue. But why is government interference so important? Because we think that when government cannot inform you every information, it is their job to ban you from doing it. With the illustration of this is a cigarette packets. Government put like dying lungs on the packets because this is their job and this is like their best capacity to inform you that cigarettes are so dangerous. But they cannot tell you that sport gambling is so bad. But we also think that this is government job to protect you from the power asymmetry between you and the sport betting company. What is the third party harm we want to push? We think that sport betting make you become more and more extreme because money is a tipping point. Because this is so tangible, because it's pushed you to be more competitive, because money is a tangible thing. Therefore, people harass sportsmen commit hooligan because when they lose, the amount of frustration they have is so much more higher. And all of these will be elaborated by my second speaker. So proud to propose.
Thank you to the first part of that speech. And now I'd invite the first part.
Panel ready? Okay, now clear statistics of every single game Saka has played, his strategies of whether he shoots from left or midfield, screenings of every single match Matisha has played on the team Sri Lanka and how he takes wickets. Formal institutions in sports betting allow engagements with sports in a way that doesn't open up people to coercion, that actually gives you proper information, and those are the institutions we want to allow on side opposition. What is our stance in this debate? For the first time, I want to actually characterize how sports betting happens. I think it happens through two channels. The first is formal channels, which is the majority of situations right now. Apps like Fantasy Football or Dream 11, where you're often doing things like making rosters, betting on the performance of these teams. But second, it's also institutions. So for example, at F1 races, you give money to your authorities there to give you money if your team ends up winning the race, for example. What are the characteristics of this? Firstly, it's one formal network. But two, there's a large pool of users, so they often have a very big amount of money to actually use for betting. And thirdly, and this is important, they are often large companies tied up with leagues, and they often show large corporation ads. This looks like how Dream 11 ads come in every single IPL screening 500 times. And the meaning of that is that often you as a corporation who is doing sports betting have very high visibility. And I want to note the implication of this on their case. Notice crucially, there is a strong push to actually regulate these companies because they're often tied up with huge reputable corporations, literally the entire league, which means that you don't want to be spreading blatant lies because it's going to hurt other corporations that are tied up with these betting companies. Our comparative then is we're not going to ban these institutions, we're going to continue existing regulation. And notice crucially, you can't hide things like information because of the level of scrutiny that is on these companies. So firstly, we're going to provide clear information on the packs that are available. So exactly how much money are you giving? Exactly if you win, how much money are you getting back? These are clear packs of information that are given. Secondly, clear statistics on performance are available. You can go on ESPN if you don't want to look at this app, but even on the app, you can see the history of these players. Thirdly, terms and conditions, which means you have to give this money back and you can raise complaints if you're not. Fourthly, we can also do things like regulate coercive ads. So you can't say that you'll become a millionaire if you use Dream 11, for example, because if you do lie about these things, it is a state scandal. The entire league is going to have its reputation at stake. But the second type of ways in which you do sports betting is one they actually can't ban on their side. The types of betting that you do with your friends. When you go to the boxing match, the backroom betting that you're doing is not done by a corporation. You can't actually ban that. Or shady sites that are like to start up on their side that are private URLs that you're sending on the internet. Two arguments then from Team India. Firstly, on the principle of choice. Secondly, on the black market betting being far more harmful. But before that, I want to do two pieces of rebuttal. Firstly, on their overall case,
Panel, listen to the examples they keep giving. Betting they want to talk about is giving money to the guy at the bar, or money that you're using with your friends. How exactly are they banning this? Because I don't think the government can station an officer in every single bar or in every single home when you're watching a TV match on your TV. Really, all they can ban is the apps. And all of this informal stuff is going to continue happening on their side of the house. So we needed a line in that speech about how they're actually banning these things. And I want to note why this is important. If you buy all of their characterization that these sports betting are incredibly coercive, that there's peer pressure, you're still doing it on their side. But you're doing it on a more shady website. It's a random website that doesn't actually have to guarantee that it's giving your money back. We think that is far worse. But on their principle, I'll do the nitty-gritty rebuttal in my argument, but really extend their principle panel. Should you ban anything that makes you feel excited, anything that is influenced by peer pressure, anything that you don't have enough information on? Because their little thing about the stock market doesn't really work. We don't think governments are giving you information on every single company. Often you're choosing which stocks to invest on based on what people are saying on Twitter. It's a new stock that you don't actually have that information on. If you really extend their principle, they would want to ban the stock market, but they don't, because they recognize governments do not have the ability to restrict how you spend your money, and that is the principle we're going to run in this debate. Our first argument then on the principle of choice. And the first thing I want to do in this principle is tell you that often these are informed choices that people are able to make. That despite the rush, often you channel that rush in a good way and make good decisions. Firstly, because often you just do have a lot of information. We think the types of people who are betting the most are more experienced fans. And notice crucially, the unique thing about sports is that you have so much information on it. ESPN gives you the entire history of every single player on the team. There's literally statistics calculated by really, really strong algorithms by the league itself. There's detailed analysis by commentators of the trajectory of the team, of the choices and strategies that they have to make in the match. So notice crucially, it's not just a choice you're making it alongside experienced commentators. They make it seem like a bad thing, but these are often people who have more experience in the field to begin with. But secondly, even then, notice crucially, sports is an investment you're making, knowing that it's unpredictable. You know that there's a 50% chance that you're not going to win. You know that if there's a random goal at the end of the match, you may lose. People who are watching sports for a long time know that it's unpredictable. You go and taking that risk with you to begin with. And thirdly, the unique thing about sports is that it ends, which is why you can't compare this to things like banning drugs, because once the competition is over or your team is knocked out, you're not going to do sports betting anymore, and that means that it's not addictive in the way that, for example, drugs are to begin with. Formal networks of sports betting, like apps and institutions, strengthen this. They increase the information you have. They actually increase the data that you can make more informed choices of to begin with. But at our worst, let us say this is not an informed choice, which is their best case. We still think that it's important that you have the choice to do sports betting. And this deals with their claim, which is that people gain nothing from doing sports betting. We just think this is absolutely false. One, often it's a way you can engage with the game. Talent is not spread equally. Not everyone can be playing on the ground in a stadium, but you do feel like you have a stake in the game when you are betting. The fear you feel on the ground when the goal is hit by the other team. The sense of victory you feel when you throw a basket. You can't feel that race of emotion if you're not on the ground, and we allow people to actually feel that as a result of sports betting. You feel a unique sense of victory to begin with. Often this is a way that you can trust a player, show them that you're investing in them in a way that you can't by just watching these games to begin with. It is on our side that often you're able to get this form of benefits from sports betting. I want to really note why this is important. The state doesn't ban gambling, even though we think it is far worse than sports because you don't have proper information. The state doesn't ban the stock market, even though often we are making decisions off of just small-term instincts that we have. This is because the state recognizes that you should have the ability to make choices that you want to make, that make you happy, and we think this is just an extension of that, which is why we shouldn't ban this. Second argument then on the black market betting being far more harmful, I'll take it to you.
When Apple has introduced their feature, this project infrastructure investment, but what if a player is sick or a judge is biased and you give that information up front?
We just don't think that's true, right? Like, who is this judge that is biased in sports? We think you can see all the past matches they've played, all the strategies that they've used. Second argument then on the black market betting being more harmful. And the impact of this argument is everything that they say is far worse on their side if a black market forms. We think the black market is going to be formed. Often it's an ingrained culture to do betting. Often there's a huge amount of money US corporations can make off of this. So we think two things happen on their side. Firstly, you create smaller informal networks on their side in the form of websites, for example, or IRL networks where often you go to boxing matches and you do backroom betting because people are still doing that on the ground. The government can't really find out about that. And you often can't close these things. Informal networks, the government just has no idea it's happening. But even in the case of like shady websites online, often you don't know that there's so many of them popping up, especially in large competitions, you can't shut all of them down. Why do we think people are going to opt into the black market? First, let's talk about hardcore fans who are affected by the peer pressure and coercion that they want to talk about so much. These are individuals actively seeking to do betting because they want to engage in the game to begin with. This is not a minority of people. But secondly, even in the case of moderate fans, when you go to a pub and all of your friends are betting, that peer pressure still applies to you. We think we're still doing it on their side. why is it harmful then that these are worse? Firstly, they are not regulated. So that is the situation when you don't have to give proper information on statistics. You can do bad advertisements. You can say you're going to become a millionaire if you actually invest in our thing. And we also think in terms of informal networks that are in person. These are also far, far worse. It increases the risk that people on the ground are able to lie to you about the teams. They're able to tell you that they have some special information about the horse fee that one team is getting, and that means that you're likely to make worse bets on their side of the house because you don't have accurate information to begin with. But also, we think it increases the risk that you don't get your money back. On the comparative, you go to formal networks, which actually ensure that you're getting your money back, which actually give you far more data to begin with to make better bets. For all of these reasons, we're incredibly proud to propose. Is this volume okay for everyone? Okay. Panel, when gamblers and sport bettors have to sell their homes to live on the streets and have loan sharks coming for their throat, we think that sports betting is fundamentally a harmful industry that's creating a crisis not only to adults but also to young adults. And we think to that point then we need to have government intervention. First is on the model and what we do support on our side. We think that we're going to have regulations on the use of cash or use of betting in public. This looks like in tandem with many things, like you cannot play cards, you cannot gamble in public on the streets because then the police officers will catch you. This is not only going to be reinforced by local officers, but this is also going to be setting the cultural norms. For example, in many cafes you also see you're not allowed to play cards, you're not allowed to play pokers whatsoever. Secondly, is that for the illegal things, we're going to have more crackdowns onto websites. This is like, for example, many governments having more scrutiny onto websites that promote sports betting into many pirating websites as a whole. Panel, we do concede that while we aren't able to eliminate sports betting completely from the public sphere, the fact that we're able to reduce the exposure that it has on young people, which our PM already flagged to you is the root cause of many of the problems that is occurring to young people, is already a massive change on our side. But to the point where they're also conceding that many of these things are going to create many black markets, they're also conceding to the harms that it may possess onto people, which is why we think they're still agreeing with our stance in general. Three extensions in my speech. First is on the nature of sports betting and why that is actively harmful. Panel, we think that sports itself is incredibly volatile because of the fact maybe the weather is making your horse being trippy, or because of the fact that the new car model makes Charles Lecter suddenly flop in his new race, for example. Many of those things are beyond the individual's own control. This isn't just a player between the strengths of the opposition team, but rather we think there are crucially so many aspects that is changing the tide or changing the results of a game itself. That's why it's so incredibly unpredictable, because maybe the health or the mentality of that player in that certain round is going to massively change the way that it's going to turn out. But beyond just uncontrollable factors, we think currently sports is an incredibly unfair game where many governments themselves also heavily endorse various players. This looks like, for example, the Russian government having sneaking steroids into their own Olympics athletes. Although there are many regulations on the government currently, we think that the fact that sports itself is heavily politicalized already means that this is an unfair battle for people to actually put money on. But secondly, is that we know to you on how this harm is going to be exponentially larger as people become more addicted to it. The reason being, initially I may spend $20 into the sports betting, then I'm able to predict some form of the players winning or losing. I feel normalized to the fact that I am winning, and I feel like I have some sense of control over the outcome, or I'm able to predict it. But the problem with that then is you are more likely to make riskier decisions as you view these games, as you become more addicted to this hobby. That's why the impact of people losing money is going to snowball over time. That they may say that, well, you can have information that these people about the rates that they have in the past, but the problem is that the harms, you only know that you're betting into the wrong team only when you have already lost the amount of cash that you have deposited in there. And we think this is incredibly harmful, panel. Our PM already flagged to you various impacts of why this is detrimental to individuals' lives. We have not heard an explicit response from opposition team yet, but I'll just reinforce it then. Firstly, you just fundamentally lose money. All this money that you acquired through your own hard work is now being poured into an incredibly arbitrary game. But to the point where individuals are not aware of the circumstances or many factors that are influencing that result, people are going to harming themselves and their own well-being. Secondly, because of the fact that you cannot loan from many banks in order to promote such a risky hobby, you're likely going to seek out to shady alternatives where they're more likely to exploit you. This is like loan sharks that charge incredibly high rates. For example, that's why the impact here is there's going to be a perpetual cycle where you're unable to opt out of the sports betting the hobby that you're already included yourself into. Secondly, then, is an idea about why this is going to harm the majority of the young people who are going to be involved into sports betting. Before I go on, I'll take that point. Oh, sure, we would ban gambling to the point where it is going to make many people having to live on the streets where they are unable to escape from the debt cycle that they are in. We think that's where the government needs to step in and need to protect those people. The reason why the stock market is on ban panel is because literally you spend 4 to 5 years in college studying about this thing that you're going to put your money into, and many of them are already young and informed adults. We think that to the fact that they're able to calculate and see many of the rates on the market at the moment is a fundamental difference between sports betting and many of these stock market itself. Our PM already flagged to you that many of these companies are also able to have a chokehold on the information that they're spreading out. They're going to have malicious incentives, and they're also likely to hide those information whatsoever. Secondly, it's on young people and why this is incredibly harmful to them. 2 layers on characterization. Firstly, they just have far more time to engage into watching sports. That's the main audience of sports currently, because they grew up being exposed to many things like the NBA, the NFL, or esports in general. Secondly, they are far more impressionable, meaning that they're likely to be influenced by many things like sports influencer, and that's why they're likely to make riskier decisions as they go on. We think that many betting companies are likely to have incentives to cater to them because it's far easier to manipulate them. They're far more vulnerable, and they also want to tap into new markets and expand their consumer base as a whole. What this will end up happening is that you're going to make it become even more accessible to young people. Like, for example, when I pirate and I watch Frozen, I also see a lot of advertisements on sports betting on those websites as a whole. This is incredibly important because to the point where our PM proves to you that many of these companies have a chokehold and a power asymmetry over the information and the ability for them to infiltrate into people's mentality. This means that more young people are likely going to be participating into these sports. Why is this bad then? Due to our previous mechanisms on why sports itself is so volatile, now that you're going to, this unfair game is being rigged, when you lose money, it's far worse for them. Because firstly, these people are not financially stable yet, panel. Even one of our team members is an avid sports bettor, and he's 16. We think that because you're catering to such young audiences in the status quo, this is incredibly dangerous, because these people are not people who are able to have cash to spare, who are able to bear the cost of losing a bet afterwards. We think this is also likely to be in a perpetual cycle, because now I lost money, I'm constantly scared and I want to get that money back, which means that I'm likely to invest into future sports events as well. So that is why this is going to be a self-reinforcing cycle. But secondly, is that this is a cycle of addiction that hinders the ability to balance with their daily lives as well. Maybe I started sports betting as a hobby when I was in university, but now I'm going to make this and jeopardize my own academic outcomes. Before I go on, I'll take that point.
Would you stop poor people from investing in the stock market?
Wait, sorry. Okay, we think that poor people are unlikely to be the ones who are going to cater to the stock market in the first place, but we think crucially, these people are likely going to, incredibly desperate people who are going to cater to things like sports betting due to how accessible that sport is in the first place. That's why we think many poor people are already, also one of the people who are going to be heavily influenced and harmed under the status quo. Why is this so important then, panel? We think that as young people are unable to have a balance between their own daily lives and the hobby that has gotten them into this massive toxic cycle in the first place, we think the state needs to protect them, because the sheer quantity of people who are going to be harmed here is massive. This looks like thousands of students who are going to join into sports betting simply because they perceive it to be a casual activity, but many of their peers are coercing them into. But secondly, is that we think that this is going to be but secondly, is that these people are incredibly vulnerable because they don't have a lot of financial room to spare, and that's why they're going to be especially harmed in the first place. Why does this weigh over the argument about the black market then? We think that as you have the black market, although there's going to be hardcore sports players who are going to be pouring their money into, which we think you can't really be helped on either side, at least we're able to significantly reduce the amount of coverage and the amount of control that they have over the exposure of information that they have on young people. Panel, let's just be realistic here. Sports betting isn't just a casual hobby that people will do on a regular basis, but this is an actively harmful transaction. That is where sports betting companies are infiltrating into your media. They are manipulating your information that you receive, and they're stealing the money out of your own pockets. For all those reasons, and incredible really proud to propose.
Thank you. Second proposition to that speech. I now invite the second opposition.
Panel ready? Panel, when Portugal banned gambling, requests to loan sharks increased twofold to the extent that they had to reverse that ban. If their side wants to run this case in the extremes, if they want to say that these are decisions that are incredibly coercive, that your friends are pressuring you, we think on either side of this debate, you bet. The difference in this debate is that betting happens in black markets on their side, on unregulated networks, and that's when their harm occurs just so much worse. Two clashes in this speech. First, is this principally just? Second, which side is better for sports fans? First, let's talk about the principle. Our case was clear. This is a legitimate choice for people to make, and the state can't take that away from you. What is the pushback we receive from them? The first thing they say is, this is a really addictive choice, but there really is no mechanism here. They don't prove to you why it's addictive. The average person works really hard for their money. They save away 9 to 5 in their corporate office. They recognize that value of that money. They know that they need to provide for their family as well. So we don't think just because you happen to be in a bar, or just because your friend is telling you that betting is really fun, you're going to actually risk all of your life savings suddenly. This cannot be their only mechanism. But the second and more important thing they hinge their case on, and these are sites that hide information from you, and you're making these decisions in a rush, so you're making uninformed choices. The first thing I want to point out is all of their issues with websites are issues with websites we can correct. You can regulate it to mandate that sites provide you that information, show you past performance, show you track records. Obviously in this debate is that the political capital to institute a ban on these corporations that have so much power within the government, we at least have the ability to say these regulations work. But the second thing is, even if you don't buy the regulations point panel, I just think there is competition in status quo. The fact that there are so many betting websites that are able to exist formally because they know this is a big industry means that you have a competitive incentive to be the one that offers the most information, to be the most reliable one, so you have more people opting into you as opposed to another site. If there is a site that is exploitative and taking more commissions, I don't think there are a large number of people that want to go to that site. But finally, often when you are sports betting, even if it is an informal setting, you are part of a larger sporting culture and are following the game. So you probably know information. Even if that information isn't perfect, we think that's still fine because you consent to knowing that sports is unpredictable. You consent to knowing that there are things you can't control. There are factors that you just don't know about. And in status quo, we already allow individuals to speculate and make decisions that are unpredictable. That is why we have the stock market. And honestly, panel, their response is here, you studied this in college, like the average person who puts money in the stock market isn't a person who studies economics in college. My father bets in the stock market, panel. I can tell you he doesn't know what he's doing. Meaning on their side, there are so many factors outside their control in other choices as well. You don't know if a company is shorting a stock, if that means the stock is going to go down in the next 2 months. This means that on status quo, we already allow these kinds of choices to exist. Importantly, because the state can't pass value judgments on how you spend your money. It is your money at the end of the day. If you gain enjoyment from sports betting, which we think you do in a lot of instances because you're able to build fan cultures around it, because you feel like you're part of the game, that is a legitimate choice for you to make. They're not shown you why that's not the case. And it's ways over there practical as well, because we already allow choices that might be harmful for individuals. Before I move on to the second clash, I will take that POI. What is the government job to make sure that you can happy betting on Ronaldo compared to the cycle of debt that you might face? We think the government is a coercive agency and as a result has the obligation to make sure that they give you the individual freedom to decide how you want to live your life, how you want to spend your money. We think it is abhorrent that the government tells you that we think this is a bad decision you're making, so we're going to ban this for you. They can't pass value judgments on your choice. Second clash then on fans. I want to be nuanced in this debate panel because I think there are a variety of types of fans that exist, not just the characterization they want to talk about. So firstly, there are often a lot of moderate fans, and here their case collapses because these are not fans that are risking their life savings. These are not fans that are getting trapped in cycles of gambling because they recognize the harms of this. They recognize that there's money at stake. But second, let's talk about the fans that they wanted to talk about, the addicted fans, the fans who want to engage in sports betting because that's the only way you can enjoy sports panel. If that's the case, I suspect that they still want to bet, and that's when they turn to shady sites that they can't track on their side panel. It's really hard for governments to individually track them down. You don't know when another site pops up. That's when they turn to informal ball networks. And it's not enough to say, well, you can't really play poker in public. That still happens in status quo panel illegally. A lot of police officers will have no idea this is happening because this is not something the bar is advertising. The bar isn't approaching police officers to participate in their gambling ring. It is obviously doing this in ways that are covert. But at the same time, I also think this is generally really accessible. One, for these fans that really care, they will go out of their way to find these sites that exist. But second, often bars know to target them, often because they tell you that you're watching sports in communal settings, it is just really easy for gambling to pop up. So it's not sort of this black market that's shady that no one knows about. It is a black market that most people know about, but governments cannot ban it. And I want to note the implication of this in their case, because I think it flips the entirety of it. One, you put more money into gambling when it happens in decentralized networks. This is because on our side, when you have the option to opt into like a formal setting, that's when you do that because that's just something that feels more safe. It is also just a lot more popular because there's a lot of advertisement around these platforms. On their side, you have decentralized limited pools, which means that each individual person has to put more money into the pool. So if they cared about people losing their savings, their side encourages that. But secondly, we think there's just so many more risks that happen when you are in the black market. You don't know if you will get your money back. You don't know any form of information, which we think means that we turn their case on their head. They needed to respond to this argument. The one-line response of we can still regulate it doesn't work. My argument then in this debate on why we're also able to improve sports culture as a whole. I think there are three ways in which this occurs. Firstly, fan networks are simply more likely to exist as a result of formal sports betting. You can have forums on these websites to often discuss the strengths and weaknesses of different players. You also now deeply engage with the sport because you have the incentive to make an informed choice so you don't lose your money, which means that you go from being a passive fan who's just maybe watching the game in the background to a fan who actually knows what's going on, to a fan who's trying to seek out more information, and that's when you're able to meaningfully become part of the sports community. That can't happen on their side. But secondly, a lot of people are now engaging with sports based on statistics because that's what they're seeing every time they're making a bet. That's the regulation on our side. That means your favorite players are not just based on popularity cults or who gets the most coverage anymore, but are based on actual performance. And this is performance that also takes into account their team contribution. So the number of assists they're making, the number of passes or defenses they do. This means that not just the most popular players in a team, but even underdogs are able to get a lot more attention from teams on our side when they see their contribution quantified. And I think this is really good because teams are forced to give platforms in a more equalized way. That means more players are able to move up the ranks. But finally, and most importantly, panel, corporations have now an incentive to invest in local sports as well. This is because sports betting is also something that gets them a lot of money. You can earn in the form of commissions, and often you can gain a lot of interest around a particular tournament that's happening and gain a lot of money as a corporation. And we think this means you want to increase the interest that is in local sports tournaments as well. This is why in India, we see Dream 11 investing in the Subrata Cup. That means that they get their games televised. That means they want to platform individual players so they get more coverage. That means local sports is able to improve as a whole. And I want to note the importance of this. One, that means you're able to have like a lot more accessible sports culture. Often the sports culture around larger tournaments, yes, while it is massive, it is not as accessible because not everyone is going to watch the FIFA games, right? They don't have the money to do so. It is when you develop local sports that people can engage with sports in a way that is more meaningful, can actually go to watch the games because those are games that are accessible to them. But secondly, we think you improve the individual lives of athletes. And I want to be clear, these are not the most privileged athletes. They're a local player who would not be known on the counterfactual. It is when you give corporations to prop them up as well that you're able to make sure that they earn a living for themselves. That sports, what is generally a really unpredictable field, is a field they can make a career out of. At the end of the day, we're the side that protects individual choice and protects sports culture as a whole. For all those reasons, I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
Okay, before I start, pronouns they, them, and I just want to have a quick trigger warning because my opening line is a bit sensitive because it's a dark joke related to sports, so I'm just putting it out there, yeah. Okay, my speech starts in 3, 2, 1. There's a really dark joke in Vietnam that it goes, after every match between Real Madrid and Barcelona, there are empty sandals found on Long Binh Bridge. The fact that some people have given up their lives, have lost their life savings, have had their entire families torn apart because of a losing bet has become a joke because of how normalized and desensitizing sports betting has become surely shows us how necessary government intervention is right now, how urgent the demand for it. Before I go into individual clashes, I just want to take a step back, panel. We really need to ask ourselves, why is sports betting so popular in the first place? Because just isn't the concept of gambling just simply insane? You know you probably won't win, and yet you gaslight yourself into continuously wasting money into something that's going to just make you waste even more money, right? It's a self-perpetuating cycle that to a rational human being makes no sense. But secondly, right, why did sports betting become so popular so quickly in the first place, right? It's because sports has always been popular, because the nature of sports is that it's exhilarating, it's engaging, it's competitive, that makes people want to watch it, that made people, made business people see the potential of a gambling industry involved with sports in the first place. What is the conclusion of this, panel? It's that sports betting has snuck its way into sports culture and has framed itself as the norm. It's framed itself as an expression of loyalty towards its club. Before sports betting was ever a phenomenon, people already liked sports. People never needed sports betting, right? It is only because of these massive institutions that team opposition themselves talked about that people feel the need to engage in sports betting in the first place, because they've gaslit themselves and the industry has gaslit them into thinking this is the right way to have fun in sports rather than just simply enjoying a beer with your friends over a losing match. So why is this so important? Because this just completely demolishes the entirety of team opposition's case, because their analysis is completely reliant on this premise is that in a vacuum people already want to bet. We literally just proved to you about why it is people only want to bet because the betting industry is so prominent and because it tells them that betting is the right way to go in the first place. But now, are we more charitable? Engage with the analysis one-on-one. So firstly, right, let's just talk about their idea on the benefits of a massive industry. Now, firstly, right, they tell us about the black market and whatnot. I think right? Just the fact that, okay, even if there's a black market, just the fact that it's so much less common rather than a legalized, institutionalized industry is already a massive common good. We've already described to you so many second-party harms, right? But secondly, right, just because there might be a black market that rises up is not a reason for us to not ban the industry, right? The final conclusion of their logic is presumably we should completely legalize meth, cocaine, all of the drugs out there because the Mexican cartel would take advantage of the black market, right? But thirdly, right, opposition is pretending that the betting industry isn't already shady, right? It looks sure, there might be there might be massive institutions, whatever, but it's in fact this popularity that allows for smaller grassroots, I can't think of another word, so I'll just use grassroots, smaller websites to pop up. They talk about these massive examples, but in Vietnam, it's not about those things. It's about Bet88 that you probably never heard of because it's only popular within Vietnam, and it is these smaller companies that engages with the most vulnerable stakeholders, i.e. young adults, because the barriers of entry are so low and because there's so little regulation. Because how on earth can the government regulate these smaller companies, right? And this leads to them taking out loans from loan sharks, giving up their cars and live college tuition to pawn shops because they think that I'm gonna win. I trust in Real Madrid. I trust in Crystal Palace. I'm calling you out, Kang. This delusion that leads to them to make massively stupid financial decisions in the first place, right? But I'm just gonna really ask, how are you gonna regulate people spending money? Because presumably, if your analysis on the principle to spend money in the first place, however you want, then presumably you should allow them to commit fully to their addiction. Presumably, you should allow them to snowball into just spending more and more money into a Crystal Palace that's honestly never gonna win the Premier League, right? But now, it's actually next. They tell us about it leads to people moving up the ranks. Let's really look at analysis here, line by line, right? Because Like, no, panel, a club actually doesn't make money out of a popular player. And in fact, the popular, like oftentimes managers and coaches hate this popular player because they have a massive ego. Because whenever they make money for themselves rather than the entire club. What they do make money out of, panel, is wins and success as a team. And that's what gives them incentive to maximize talent investment, which leads to them like looking at smaller clubs to find potential rising talents there, or just investing into the entire club because sports is like you need everybody involved to be the best of the capacity in order to get the Premier League championship, right? And this is the analysis, like this just completely washes out the case. So let's engage with the most important point from the speech before I move on. PY, please.
Individuals all the time spend money on other people that might be benefit them, but generally seem like bad financial decisions. Why should the state get to adjudicate what is a rational decision to make?
Gotcha. I'm gonna grab that now. The principle on like choice or happiness, whatever they're calling it, right? Note, panel, that their principle is incredibly hung on the idea of like info and whatnot. But no, most people aren't professional bettors. They're in fact casual fans that have fallen into addiction, follow into the coercion of this industry in the first place. And they tell us that, you have a lot of info. You invest knowing that's unpredictable. Sure, we're going to concede with that. But the flip is this, panel, is that ultimately none of these things matter because sports is so like unpredictable. Like Hamilton, my GOAT, like recently won like out of like nowhere. Like I never expected him to win because his car is so bad, right? But that is the nature of how unpredictable sports is. And the fact that you think you know a lot, the fact that you justify to yourself, I know it's unpredictable, is how you justify spending even more money within these industries in the first place, right? But secondly, note that happiness isn't exclusive, right? Because like we told you, the nature of sports is exhilarating. So even if without sports betting, you likely would enjoy yourself anyways, you would have the happiness of when your club finally wins a match. You would have a sense of community, of sharing the pain when your favorite club loses, for example. All of these things are things that happen independently of them. But the flip is this, panel. I think on their side, people are actually much less happy because they're coerced into just losing their money again and again. And they feel like, I need to do this. And even though they feel despair over losing their hard-earned cash, they still feel an incentive to invest it again because that's what the people around them tell them to. And this is incredibly miserable, panel, when you're consistently losing money, you're consistently losing a tangible stake in the game. But thirdly, panel, I think the government wants you to be happy, but they also don't want you to be self-destructive. And they tell us that, the state is coercive industry and so you must provide rights. Sure, that may be true, but it's not just that. I think if insofar as the government is an oppressive like agency or whatever, they also have the duty to provide you with information and provide you capacity to make good decisions in the first place, right? And so they want you to be happy, they don't want you to self-destruct, and so the compromise is they implement barriers of entry and provide you info, right? This looks like the fact that you force companies to like publicize information when they're going public, or the fact you're putting on cigarette labels of how dirty your lungs are after you smoke a cigarette, or the barriers of entry, like the casino itself looks incredibly intimidating, right? None of these checks and balances or info applies to the sports betting industry, and insofar as you can't inform and regulate it, you must ban and minimize the extent to which it's popular within society in the first place. But the way is this, panel, I would we are willing to trade off like individual rights to happiness of some if it means maximizing social benefits, because we don't want the normalization and unregulated like sites to pop up. We don't want young adults to be taken advantage of. We don't want the sporting industry to be a gateway to other addictions, and we don't want people to actively be harassed because of the fact that they didn't live up to the unfounded expectation of their fans, leading to being harassed online, leading to have their faith completely lost, and people just badgering them non-stop because they had one bad day. We'd much rather prioritize these other individuals rather than the very people perpetuating this toxic culture in the first place. So proud to propose.
Ready?
We were clear to you from the start. If a ban would mean all of the harms that they rest their case on, of people going to loan sharks, of people risking their life savings on their side of the house, we don't care if we must ban this and a government obligation exists in theory. It is about what people on the ground are feeling. It is what people on the ground are actually hurting from. The state has an obligation to protect people. If people are worse off on their side of the house, that's when we actually meet that state obligation. 3 clashes in the speech then. Firstly, is exactly sport betting this coercive and addictive? Secondly, where are fans much worse off? And third, where we increase engagement with sports. But before I move on to my first clash, I just want to point out 2 things at the very top of my speech. First, they have not, by this point of the debate, engaged with the counterfactual we gave you. We did not have to tell you that we did nothing to sports betting. We told you that we could regulate it on our side of the house as well. So all of the things they told you, that is to say, companies being incredibly manipulating, giving you absolutely no information, those were not things that we had to stand for on our side of the house as well. We think the government on our side of the house always had the power to make sure you got the information, always had the power that the most manipulative advertisements were ones that were already taken down from the public space. We did not have to support what they pushed on us. The second thing I want to move is that they have not actually proven the burden of their impact in this debate either, because they never actually proved to you why the friend asking you to put $20 goes suddenly to you losing your house or you going suddenly to going to loan sharks. They needed to prove why, for that tangible harm to exist, that extremity of harm was actually achieved on their side of the house. First clash then, on which side is actually is sports betting that addictive and coercive? At the top of the speech, I just want to note in this clash, on our side of the house, we would rather the government engage in a balance of rights. So we think there are some people who engage in sports betting because they truly do want to, because it does make sports a lot more fun for them, and some might be slightly coerced into it. But sure, I want to know the government can do our responsibility on our side of the house by making sure that the information is actually provided, that we are actually able to stop explicit manipulation on our side of the house. If it was about government obligation, we're the side able to balance both the obligations the government has. But let's then take out the unique responses they gave to you regarding why it is that sports betting is actually so bad. First, sports is volatile. It's out of your control. Guess what? So is the stock market. You cannot predict which company is going to go down. You cannot predict which recession is going to happen. And uniquely the difference is people know that the sports is volatile when you're going into it. You know for a fact that your team might win, your team might lose. You know exactly how much money you might make, how much money you might lose. So any contract might have risks, might have harms. We think sports being volatile is not a metric for whether or not we allow people to make that decision. Second, on sports being exhilarating. Panel, that just sounds like them having an issue with sports being fun in the first place. I get a dopamine rush from taking chocolate. That does not mean that it becomes addictive on our side of the house. If people just want to have fun, they should have the ability to put money into something they find fun or exhilarating. We don't really know why exhilaration means that it becomes incredibly addictive. The third thing they told you was that it becomes so normalized that advertisements are going to be so manipulative on their side of the house. And apart from the response and regulation, 2 reasons why we don't think advertisements are that manipulated. One, the fact that those advertisements exist within the visible public sphere means that you're able to call them out. So when you, for instance, lie about statistics, guess what? There are expert fans who exist who often follow these sports companies and often can tell you that guess what? You are lying. These are advertisements that are manipulated. And guess what? That means we're actually able to call out those advertisements in the first place. But second, just generally, the fact that even they're able to point out the fact that maybe sports betting might have some harms means that uniquely there is discourse existing in the counterfactual. We don't think there's explicit peer pressure. Sometimes families explicitly ask you not to do things like sports betting. We think that balances out. There is not an explicit coercive pressure to always go into this. And I want to note the importance of this. If it is true that sports betting is not as coercive or addictive as they want to claim it to be, their only impact in this debate can't be just going into debt. You might buy a car, you might buy luxury goods. If you choose to do so, if you had some choice over that, that's not a harm in the debate. Before I move on to my second clash, I'll take a brief while.
We're not engaging with the full spectrum here. We told you that they not only, betting companies not only distort information, they also glorify and display advertisements to vulnerable young people. Please engage.
I don't see
see why glorified advertisements will mean I will give up my house the next day. At the end of the day, it is a glorified advertisement, but first we can still call out the glorification. I don't even know what that glorification really looks like on their side of the house. They haven't yet told you how manipulative or glorification of these advertisements actually works. But second, probably that is, sports is fun, maybe this is something you can do, and uniquely you know at the end of the day this is going to be a loss of money. We think we can actually just regulate advertisements to make sure they give you that information. Second clash then on why fans are worse off. By this point, the only impact they have in this debate is that fans might lose money. First, I want to minimize this impact, and second, flip it to you that why fans actually lose more money on their side of the house. Two things. First, we think fans aren't really as stupid as they claim them to be on their side of the house. Peer pressure is not strong enough for you to give up your motorbikes or give up your houses, and uniquely that is because in a lot of cases, the kinds of fans they tell you in the beginning are rational consumers. They themselves tell you these are people who are casual fans. We don't understand why you strictly go into something else. We think a vast majority of people have a bunch of different interests, a bunch of different priorities, a bunch of different kinds of peer pressures to even care about in the first place. We don't think this is the first thing. The second thing is, I don't think they tell you the full scope of sports betting, because sure, you might lose money in some cases, but you might also win. So we don't think it is always a thing that you always are going to have a tangible harm of loss of money. Some people might actually make more money in this debate. You need to prove why that was always not going to be the case. But then I want to note uniquely, we flipped their impact. We told you that fans are going to work within the black market and more are likely to get addicted. And if they want to tell you these are fans who are so addicted, who will do this at any point in their life, who will give up everything they want to bet, these were not fans that were going to stop on their side of the house. What then happens and what are the responses we got? First, apparently advertisements is what allows this to be addictive. You won't have that in this counterfactual. Two reasons. First, apparently the ban is something that's happening in the present. If people are already so addicted, if young people are already down this rabbit hole, we think they're going to get addicted on their side of the house anyway. You can't solve for addictions that already exist in the first place. There are always going to be people, huge amounts of people that enter the black market. But second, I want to note a vast majority of people don't enter, for instance, sports betting just because of the advertisements. It is the small level peer pressure you want to talk about. If it is the dopamine rush you want to talk about, even when advertisements don't exist, you're still probably going to bet. It's because of the fact that sports is so exhilarating. So guess what? On their side of the house, you will actually still bet. The second thing I want to note, they can't also say that smaller companies actually exist much more likely on our side of the house when it is that larger companies exist, because we told you actually crowd out unregulated peers on our side of the house when black markets don't exist. And there's a reason for one. One, when you want to go to the largest companies, the one with the most scrutiny, because they also have the aggregator effect. The more people on them, the more money you're able to pool. But second, these are the only ones that often have the ability to advertise. What does this mean for this case? We were very simple. Black markets are worse for every single of the impact they wanted to talk about. One, they are so much more coercive. They have no scrutiny on them. The information can be explicitly lying. You can't call them out because they're not in the public sphere in the first place. Second, I want to know, any of their impacts on monies are much, much worse. Because you know what? That might actually mean losing your house. That might actually mean losing your motorbikes. If they wanted to care about that, that was something. But also, they can often be explicitly exploitative. Even when you win, they can tell you maybe you lost and actually take over your money even when that was money you should have had. So for all of their impacts, they were much worse off. And lastly, we told you that even if in their absolute best case that doesn't happen, if these are people who are so addicted to sports betting, they would go to gambling, lose all of their money anyway in the counterfactual. What this means is that fans are always going to be worse off because they lose more money within the black market on their side. So proud to propose.
Thank you to the third opposition speaker and now by opposition reply.
According to side propositions, extreme characterization in this round, there are people who are willing to risk their lives and houses for betting. Our question was simple. Why do these people not seek out the black market, seek out bar bets, seek out private websites where all of their harms occur but much, much worse? According to them, sports is so unpredictable. Our question is clear. Why do they not ban the stock market? Because some stocks might actually be shorted. They didn't want to take their principle to its logical extension. We were clear from the start that the state should not adjudicate legitimate choices as irrational. Two clashes in the speech. Firstly, I want to talk about the principle. Their push here was that this is a bad coercive choice and you're going to get sucked into this. But the caveat they gave in their first speech actually knifed their entire principle. Because sure, the stock market has a government central body giving information. We also have ESPN reports. Sure, sports is unpredictable, but also if a CEO has a sex scandal, that means that the corporation stocks are going to completely fall and you're going to lose all of your money. But notice crucially, it was formal institutions that actually decreased their principal harm. Because we have way more data. We have way more scrutiny. When you're literally tied to a league, you can't lie because the league is going to sue you for it. But secondly, we told you actually spend less money when you're on a formal institution because corporations have large pools of money. So you don't have to invest that much to get a big reward from gambling. It is on their side. If you're going to an individual small website on the internet, then you have to give more money to get the types of rewards that you want. So really, people are more likely to go bankrupt on their side of the house. And this is important. They aren't changing coercion. They're only changing the institution that is feeding into that coercion. I want to weigh our content in this clash. Firstly, at our worst, you don't have consent when you're opting into sports betting, maybe because you're peer pressured, for example. But they didn't prove why this is not an informed choice. We told you, you uniquely have more information in the case of sports. You have ESPN data, you have commentators, you have very clear, undisputed data on what's actually going to work. But secondly, let's take our absolute best case. Let us say these are really uninformed choices. They need to tell us then why that necessitates a ban. This is their best case. Let us say proposition doesn't have a black market on their side. States always allow us to take risky decisions all the time. The stock market, gambling, literally just buying luxury goods that could bankrupt you to begin with. We can go into the nitty-gritty of where there is actually information. But how can the government come and see each individual sports betting scenario and see whether they're actually making an informed choice? You as an individual government don't have as much information on each person and the level of coercion that they're under. And notice crucially, this is same as the stock market. An 18-year-old has less information than a 30-year-old who's working in finance. Some people are making a fully informed choice, some people are slightly coerced. The reason why we ban drugs is because it's not a choice anymore. You're literally not psychologically sane. Your brain is altered when you do take drugs. They needed to tell us why betting is the same as taking meth. We don't think they actually proved that in their case. So at the end of the day, betting is actually quite different because you stop betting when the competition is over. You stop betting when your team ends. That is not the same as drugs to begin with, which is why on our side, we have to regulate so that more people can make an informed choice rather than straight out banning a choice that actually helps people. They really needed to prove to us why a ban was necessary. They did not. Second clash then on where are we better for bans. All of their impacts were flipped when we told you about the black market. This is not a shady black market that's underground in alleys. It is what you do with the bar. It's what you do with your friends at home. It is a website that you go to on the internet. They said that people don't opt into the black market on their side because the betting industry is what is setting the norm. But the more and more they talk about the millions of youth who are losing their lives to betting because they're addicted to gambling, they're going to shift to the black market. It doesn't matter if the betting industry is what sets norms. According to them, millions of people are already addicted. They will switch to the black market. That cuts across their case too. So they really needed to tell us how people so addicted to the rush are going to stop going just if the app doesn't exist for gambling to begin with. If these people are really so addicted, it is better that we give them a formal channel to actually do it. They never responded to our counterfactual of regulations. If they can ban these apps, we can obviously regulate them. But we also gave you structural reasons for why it's likely that we can regulate them. You're tied up to leagues. You have ads from corporations. You are accountable to begin with. But also, you're literally affected by laws that don't allow you to do coercive advertisement to begin with. We were actually far more nuanced here. We told you most people aren't going bankrupt, but a lot of people are going to shift to the black market because those are norms that already exist. And I want to weigh this. At their best case, they don't get a black market, which they didn't actually prove. But they needed to respond to our counterfactual of regulations. They needed to tell us why it's such horrible coercion, which is why our second speaker argument matters. We increase engagement in sports. We increase the amount of enjoyment that people are able to get. That is important. They never responded. That's their best case. Incredibly proud to propose.
Before I start my speech, I just like to clarify something. That is, if I do happen to make faces when the opposition team is speaking, it's not a sign of disrespect. I was just simply thinking of the memes that I saw on TikTok. So just be upfront about that. Panel, listen to Team India's rhetorics. They told us that you might lose some money when you're betting into sports, but you may also gain money. Panel, this sounds like exactly the journey of a drug addiction, of a gambling addiction, and we think this is exactly the rhetoric that is being used by betting companies to prey on many vulnerable teenagers like Kevin on our team. We think it's time we should ban it due to the massive social and tangible consequences that it's having to society. First clash then is are the audiences or the bettors making an informed decision or not. Their first speaker told us that, oh, you're going to display a lot of information. There's a lot of sources where people are able to make an informed decision yourself. But then their second speaker was like, well, but these people are also consenting to knowing that sports is heavily unpredictable, and they are agreeing to all of the risks. Which one is it then? Our team told us that our whole case was on why betting companies currently are distorting the rates and results of many sports events, and their advertisements are also endorsing and glorifying betting as an activity. That's why on their side they cannot claim that people are fully informed, or they are like knowing that these sports is unpredictable in the first place. But let's look at the most charitable cases where there is objective and holistic information, and somehow the government is able to control it. We told you on how fundamentally the nature of sports is a dangerous and risky activity. The reason why it's so volatile is firstly it's on uncontrollable factors like the weather, like the health of the athlete, or the horse that was running on that day. Or it's also because of the political involvement that it has onto sports, like how the Russian government has a scandal on like giving steroids to their Olympics athletes. All those things were not really not engaged whatsoever by their side of the house. That's why we think sports is an incredibly arbitrary thing to bet upon. Then their best engagement then is on, well, the state allows you to make risky financial decisions anyways, which is really the only and the best engagement that they have. Panel, firstly, we also ban gambling on our side. Don't see why we have to contradict ourselves here. But secondly, these financial decisions look like addictions where you have to lose your entire life, you sell your houses, you live on the streets because of this hobby that you initially signed up for. It looks like loan sharks knocking on your door where you have to hide away your daughters because you were so heavily immersed into this sport. The reason why this is so important is we told you that these people, these exact consumers, are being exploited not only by betting but also by loaning companies when they are doing it whatsoever. Their second response then was, well, you're not going to really be addicted or anything. It's only like a casual hobby where sports players are going to do so. We told you, panel, it's not like you're going to sell your house the moment you discover like FB88, but it looks like you start with a small sum of money, then you are normalized to the feeling of winning. Then when you lose, you're scared because now you want to make that money again, which makes it become a perpetual cycle where the harm is going to be exponentially larger as you progress. Opposition also conceded to this when they say, well, some people even make it their entire careers. Panel, this sounds like a pretty bad addiction to me, and we think this is perpetuating in the cycle in the lives of people. Then they gave us a comparison, like, oh, this is similar to, like, this is not the same as using drugs, but our PM literally has her whole case on how people are going to have this huge sense of adrenaline when they are betting into sports, which is why they're likely to engage in it even when they continue to win. Crucially then, why is this also especially important? It's important because many young teenagers and adults are far more susceptible to betting into sports due to the fact that they are being exposed and constantly normalized to the activity of sports betting. Their third response then is, well, black market is going to exist and it's going to be worsened on our side. Well, firstly, you're still solving one root problem of the issue, which is you're exposing this to so many young people when they just go on the website to watch Frozen, for example. That's why we're less likely to have young people who are going to start their own journey into this cycle of betting in sports in the first place. But secondly, this isn't a good enough reason for us to not ban it. Simply for the fact that now we're able to significantly reduce the number of people who are going in there, they also conceded to a value on why sports betting is fundamentally harmful. With their stand on sports betting, then they already lose. But last year's on one minor engagement and on whether or not people are going to enjoy sports for the better. The first thing our web speaker already told you is that they're still going to enjoy sports the same anyways due to the feeling of community that they have. This is not mutually exclusive. But secondly, we flip this by saying that there's far less enjoyment to the point where the money is on the line. We have to constantly worry about whether or not they're going to win or whether or not I can make my money back. This means that they are actually putting people in a cycle of suffering where they view sports as like this massive debt collector on top of their heads. For those reasons then, protect Kevin, stand on side proposition.